I never thought I'd be one of those people with a story like this. A story I can barely say out loud without my voice shaking. Yet here I am. And to this day, that smile is burned into my mind. It started a few months ago when I moved into a new apartment in a quiet part of town. I liked the peace, but the silence at night was unnerving. I kept brushing it off, as me just not being used to the stillness, but soon I realized there was something else there, lurking in the shadows, watching. One night, I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone to ease my mind, when I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my door. It was strange because I rarely saw any neighbors, and at that hour, the building was usually silent. But the footsteps stopped right outside my door. I felt my heart rate spike as I lay there, frozen. I could feel something, standing there. Then, after what felt like an eternity, I heard a soft scratching on my door. I was terrified, but I convinced myself it was a branch or maybe an animal outside. But that night, I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching me from the darkness. The next night, it happened again. This time, though, the scratching was followed by a low, muffled chuckle. The chuckle was unsettling, like someone was enjoying my fear. And then it stopped. I wanted to believe I'd imagined it, but I knew I hadn't. My heart pounded as I lay in bed, clutching the blanket, praying for dawn. As days passed, I noticed a strange man around my building, a tall, thin figure in worn, dark clothing. His head was always cocked to the side, as if studying something only he could see. But it was his smile that made my blood run cold. His smile was stretched, far too wide, like he'd practiced it in front of a mirror for hours. It wasn't a kind smile. It was hollow, hungry. One evening, I was returning home, and as I unlocked my door, I looked back and saw him at the end of the hallway, just standing there, watching me with that eerie grin. My skin prickled. I rushed inside, locking the door behind me, hoping that would keep him out. But that night, I awoke to the sound of scratching on my window. I lived on the third floor. No one could reach my window without a ladder. I didn't want to look, but I felt compelled. I slowly turned, and there, outside my window, was his face, pressed against the glass, smiling wider than ever. His eyes were empty, like he wasn't even human, just some vessel for something dark and ancient. His mouth opened, and he whispered my name. I couldn't scream. I could barely breathe. But he didn't move. He just stayed there, watching, smiling. Somehow, he knew I was paralyzed by fear. Then, he began to laugh, a slow, guttural laugh that filled the silence, echoing in my mind long after he disappeared from the window. He never moved, but his laugh grew louder until I thought I'd lose my mind. By morning, he was gone, but his laugh, that sickening, mocking laugh, lingered. I reported him to the building manager, but they looked at me like I was insane. No one had seen a man fitting that description. I was desperate, exhausted, so I installed a camera facing the hallway outside my door. That night, I lay awake, staring at the monitor, praying he wouldn't come back. But at midnight, he did. The monitor showed him walking down the hallway toward my door, but something was wrong with the footage. His movements were unnatural, jerky, like he was glitching in and out of reality. And then, he stopped in front of my door, looking directly into the camera. He knew I was watching. He didn't scratch the door this time. He just stood there, smiling, and then, slowly, he raised his hand and pointed directly at the camera. His eyes, they weren't human. They were dark, empty, like staring into an abyss. And then he whispered, "I know you can see me. I'll be back when you least expect it." The screen flickered, and he was gone. I replayed the footage, but each time I watched, his face looked different, distorted, twisted. I couldn't tell if it was real or my mind breaking. Over the following weeks, he came back. Sometimes, I'd wake up to find him standing in my room, smiling, just watching. I'd blink, and he'd vanish. He was haunting me, and each time he appeared, his smile grew wider, his eyes darker, like he was feeding on my fear. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating, consumed by paranoia. I tried moving, but somehow, he followed. No matter where I went, he was always there, smiling. I don't know what he is. A demon, a curse, maybe even death itself. All I know is that he's waiting, watching, smiling. And if you ever see someone like him, remember my story. Don't look him in the eyes. Don't let him know you can see him. Because once he knows, he'll never stop. He's out there right now, waiting.